Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. So, as you know, as I'm sitting around searching for subjects, there's been one that's been brought up several times in my lifetime, but especially since the internet has done its thing to stories. And one of them is this rumor that the Nazis went to the Antarctica. For those of you who are really bad in geography, that's the South Pole, and created a secret military base, and then all hell breaks loose in terms of the story. So I've been doing some deep dives, looking around, trying to see what the story is down there. Boy, are they're wild stories. Now, if you've never seen this show before, and you're like, okay, just get to the point of all things. This isn't your quick, warm, fuzzy guy, talking HE double hockey sticks kind of video. But you will get all the, you won't get it all. Oh my God, how could you get it all in one video? But we're going to go through a lot. So we're going to kind of clear up some history, because what they did at various poles was very well documented by a lot of different folks and even themselves. Remember, the Germans really did document quite a bit. But I was actually fascinated when I jumped into some of the historic issues. And we will definitely address the fact that, one of the anti-conspiracy tactics is to say, no, it's all true. And it's just been, obfuscated, retold, revised. If that's one of your worries, we're in a very safe place, because we do deal with issues like that. And of course, there's always, if someone's trying to protect information, they have all the money and all the press and all the books, and they own all the algorithms behind video technologies. And so unless you're over in something like BitChute or Minds.com, where they don't play with algorithms, then you can't speak the truth about a lot of different things without your stuff getting banned, you getting suspended for 24 hours, for a week, all that kind of stuff. So just understand that you're in good company with that. It doesn't mean I'm going to agree with everything. With this particular storyline, I'm going to basically stitch together some of the above ground stuff. Then we're going to do what we do on this show, which is obviously talk about it and apply as much sort of logic as we can to what would happen if these rumors were true. Because I think in a lot of cases, it's kind of like if someone said there was time travel, for instance, and that a particular group of people actually had linear time travel, meaning they're going to travel within this particular timeline, then those folks would be gods on earth, because nothing could stop them. They would always know exactly what's going to happen, just like Groundhog Day. They just keep going back until they figure it out. Or the amazing Tom Cruise movie, Edge of Tomorrow, which still goes down in history as my favorite movies ever done. One of the most brilliantly written scripts on planet Earth. And it's got a Groundhog Day element to it. And so we don't really see any of those factions. We don't have to worship some Lochnar holding dude. We're free to kind of fuck up our lives. And, yes, there's a lot of rich people, but I don't think they want us on this planet at this point. And so the fact that we still exist means they don't have ultimate control. So just want to lay that out there as kind of a foundational thing, especially for new listeners. So just as a beginner's introduction to like the overall storyline that's going on here. The odd thing is that I never heard about the Arctic base. So the Arctic is the North Pole. Antarctic, meaning anti, is the South Pole. All the rumors that people are concerned about are that I've ever heard. I mean, maybe you've heard something different, but all the big heavy ET Cthulhu crazy things are all down in the South Pole. And the North Pole was never ever mentioned in any of the stuff I've ever heard. But as you get into it, you get into the history and the fact that these locations have been discovered, and, very little was ever built in the Antarctica And we're going to get into some of the other sort of tangential things, flat earth things and what have you. I did want to tell you just right off the bat, for those of you who are flat earthers, one of my closest friends and screenplay researchers is a geologist, and she spent 3 weeks in the Antarctica just doing ice samples and that sort of thing as part of her education, her internship, and that sort of thing. It was a tumultuous trip with like 3 months of preparation and different prepping stations before she even flew down there. And she said, you know, the whole time I was there, it was sunlight. You know, it was a big pain in the ass to sleep because your body knows it's sunlight out. And if you want to go inside buildings, they had, you know, tents that were absolutely light proof, so you could have kind of a nightclub feel in a tiny tent. If you want to see a movie, it's, you know, it's a bunch of technology to make sure it's dark enough. So with your flat earth model that circles this big ice shield down there, it doesn't happen. You know, there's like conspiracy videos about clocks that are being filmed and you never see it go 24 hours. And well, I just have a friend who's done it. So bear that in mind, folks. So the first real base that was established was in the Arctic, about 1,000 miles from Russia. It was secretly built for one reason and one reason alone, which was to study weather patterns, because they understood that a big portion of this war was going to be fought in the waters. And of course, the Germans had mastered submarines, which they called U-boats. I mean, mastered it. They mastered everything. If you really get into deep German engineering history outside of a Nazi regime or a Nazi war, you know, you're talking about by the 1920s, the German engineering was ahead in every single category of engineering worldwide. And so as they kept, even though they were impoverished by World War I and a crashing economy that really hit the tank about 1935, where again, a loaf of bread costs 500,000 Deutschmarks, which you have to have a wheelbarrow to purchase it with normal currency. There's a reason why, even with money, you don't get technology, right? You have to have the brains, you have to have the genetics to pull this thing off. And so as they got funded, all the blueprints were ready to create their naval fleets, their air force, and all of their tanks and all of the gear that they wore. Their machine guns were the best in the world. I mean, it was crazy how amazing these folks were at the time. And of course, we love their Mercedes and BMWs and other things, right? My car's engine's made in Germany. But weather was something that was going around the war circuits, meaning generals and commanders of all forces were constantly talking about, okay, you know, if it's going to be rainy, we can't do a bombing run. Accurately anyway. Because resources are limited, you can't just load up a plane with a bunch of bombs and just go and drop it. I mean, if you're doing a shock and awe thing, that's great. But if you don't wipe out an Air Force strip, bomb a boat in the water properly, then you've wasted your ammunition, which is going to take time to reconstitute, and then you could lose the war in the meantime. So they didn't want to play around. So again, you know, a lot of the generals too, they read as much as they possibly can about previous experiences. That's, you know, if you go to West Point, you're sitting inside, you know, war history because you're being bred to be a general. You're bred to be a admiral in the Navy. And so, you know, weather has always been a big factor in taking out ships. You know, how many times in history class did you hear, you know, the British were going to kick the Spaniards' asses, but the ship knocked them all out. And then vice versa, you know. The Asian fleets have had tons of issues too. So everyone has suffered due to weather. So this base that was established in the Arctic was called Alexanderland. And it was established by using U-boats, U-2 boats. There you go. Bono was like, what? No, U-boats that snuck underneath all of the ships to then pop up at this remote location and offload all these individuals to build a small base, figure out what's going on. But the base, which was discovered in, I believe, 1948, we discovered the base and started raiding the place, but they were long gone because of a sort of a tapewormy kind of parasite that was inside polar bear meat, that they think the polar bear ate a seal, and seals are known for having this, I guess, ailment, and it was causing a lot of sickness. And so they radioed in a rescue request in 1944. Everyone was offloaded and what have you. But when they got up there, they found, a complete normal base arsenal with, mines and ammunition and coats, and then tons of just meteorological data written down. And they were radioing this stuff down to Germany. And so, just trying to figure out how the weather worked. They even had like weather balloons and just the full arsenal of everything that was there. So it's a very, in terms of UFOs and other supernatural things that are associated with the South Pole base, this North Pole base was very standard, boring in terms of being entertained by this stuff. Now, before we go to the Antarctic story, I just want to lay in a little sort of footnote here for our brains, aren't we? I mean, think about the way, let me just do a couple, deltas for your brain here. It's 1980. You turn on the TV. How many channels do you have? 3 to 4, depending on where you live. 3 to 4. They totally controlled everything that we saw in terms of entertainment, news, everything. Then by 1985, homes had 100 channels. Then by 1995, you have potentially, it's hard to actually fill it up, at least your tuning box had 1,000 channels, right? Had the capability of at least giving you 1,000. And we all know it's all bullshit. There's, out of 1,000, maybe there was 50 that you might watch. They have your core staple stuff. There'd be like 4 CBSs and 3, ABCs, different times, different shows, that kind of stuff. But anyway, now we have, and I would say too, you only saw movies in 1980, primarily in a movie theater. Then by the mid 80s, you could actually, about 3 to 6 months later, you get the VHS tape and you get the movie in your house. By the 90s, it's DVDs. Towards the end of the 90s, you got the Blu-rays. And so now we have huge home entertainment systems. And so in the 21st century, by 2010, you got Netflix creating their own movies. In the last 5 years, Apple's jumped on board, Amazon's jumped on board, Hulu's jumped on board, and they have to fill up the whole thing with legacy stuff. And that's not even talking about HBO, Cinemax, Stars, all these other ones that have been around forever. And so now in one night, you can, or I should say in maybe a week, you can consume all of Westworld, 20 episodes, 1 hour apiece. Okay. That's a tremendous amount of work. Writing, production takes months and months and months to even just film the principal footage after years of preparation. And so as we ingest these conspiracies, a lot of us, I think, are just wanting to be entertained. And there's 2 different factors to being entertained. If I told you a story that like a Nazi base in Antarctica, and as I'm going to tell you what really happened here, which is boring, and then we're going to get into the more advanced stuff and then apply logic to it, see where we can go with that. If you thought it was all fake, then you have a certain rise in your endorphin levels in your mind. If you thought it was fake. But if I told you it was true at the end of the story, or I say at the very beginning, what I'm about to tell you is true, and and I got an uncle and a that all know this stuff for a fact because they were in the U.S. military and they went and discovered this stuff, and it's Donald Trump's uncle picking up Tesla stuff and inventing a time machine and all that kind of stuff. Well, how much endorphins dumping in your body then? And because we have become this short attention span theater society, well, we need a hit, don't we? And so if I come in and say something is not true, when you've been taking that, that meth of that particular conspiracy, then I'm the bad guy, right? I'm saying, oh, take it down, find something else. Now, the Nazis did create an Antarctic base. They did. They got this dude named Alfred Richer. I think that's his name. And he was a captain that was very versed in Arctic navigation. You know, generally what it took to run a vessel in these hostile environments. And they essentially had one goal, which is totally non-romantic. And then I'm sure, without a doubt, there's a ton of other goals. I mean, why not? It's just a first swipe. But there was some land down there that was claimed by Norway. Very, you know, it's a big continent down there. It's 12,000 miles around, man. I mean, it's gigantic down there. And so, you know, a lot of folks had kind of gone down to the easier spots to drive into, and they set up shop and they claim land and that kind of thing. And so, you know, but it's no one stays there until, you know, probably the 80s, where they started setting up bases and they could figure out, you know, not trade routes, but routes of supply missions and that kind of stuff and what needed to be there. So this is like the Wild West down there at this point. If you showed up and the other dude had left, you can take his house. You can live in his log cabin, so to speak, right? But, and again, some of you might think this is a cover story, and I welcome all videos that you think are more conclusive on this. Because, you know, we're going to get the cool stuff here in just a few minutes, but let's get rid of the official story about Antarctica. This abomination called margarine, which is an oil-based, a whale oil-based product at the time, was extremely popular in Europe. And I mean all countries, including England. And it was fairly popular in the Midwest and America too. You know, if you had grandmothers like mine, as a matter of fact, I had one grandmother who was like, don't ever eat that crap. It's shit. Don't eat it. And the other grandma was like, oh, this is great, you know. And the one who eat butter outlived the other two. So there's a few things going on. Because there was a lot of hostilities in the area, getting whale oil was rough. Plus, the whale oil industry had exploded for a number of reasons, all of them related to the use of whale oil. And so the herds of whales had actually been reduced quite a bit in the northern hemisphere and equatorial regions, right? And so and whales tend to hang out in cooler water because they're big blubbery things that I'm sure they get nice and warm temperatures in the ocean. So they tend to go north, they tend to go south, right? So the logical thing was that plenty of people had fished whales out of the southern hemisphere. And so Hitler, in wanting to maintain this supply of whale oil, which I'm sure he used for every, again, reason. I don't know. I don't personally know how whale oil might be metabolized into things that would be used for war, but I mean, you know, rubber boots or whatever, fuck if I know, right? But he sends a group of folks, because the whole world was going south for whales at the time. And so he's like, okay, we're going to get this boat and we're going to go down and get some, you know, a reliable source of whale oil. Of one of the major benefits is margarine. Now, because they're down there, they know that they need to maintenance the ships quite a bit. And so they got to build a base, just a real good, you know, stop and do it base. Now, this boat that they took down there, gosh, I want to brutalize the name of this thing. The Schwabenland boat. I don't know. It embarked on December 17th, 1938 to go down and start establishing this trade down there. Well, to get the whales, it had two planes on them, excuse me. I think the planes are called Dornier planes. And so they would launch off the boat with this catapult, and then they'd fly over and land on the ground. So they could start taking supplies over. So they're whaling. They're claiming land that Norway claimed, and there's a couple ways that they did the claiming of the land, which was sort of, well, actually one major way, but of course, just living there is one methodology. And, you know, I don't think Norway was going to go down and have a fist fight with Germany. But they would take these little tiny swastikas, little metal swastikas, and throw them out of the plane all over the land. And if you just happen to be walking by and you see one of these things, pick it up, you know you're in this land that at least the Germans think that they now possess, right? And there's an old story about how in one of the plane rides, they had run really low on fuel. And the only way that you can counteract a low fuel tank is to lighten the aircraft. So it takes less power to keep it in the air. And so they threw a bunch of boxes of these things out the door. And there's a joke that, I'm sure they killed penguins down below, which is kind of funny. So the boat that they took down there was converted to be an icebreaker, which is obviously just reinforcing the hull, making it extremely heavy in the front, especially so that it just runs up on the ice and it crushes it, runs up and crushes it. And, the ice gets several meters thick. So, you guys have seen those videos that are pretty wild of them doing this. But now they're down there only for about a year. And this is what's fascinating about the story. They're physically down there for 1 year, which you can't do shit in 1 year. I mean, seriously, you can't. And they're very famous for coming back with this boat, which really didn't have, I would imagine it had much use during the war, but they came back with the fleet. I think they really wanted the personnel, if anything else. And they ended up mapping the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean and finding the volcanic seam where expanding Earth explains the new plates come out of the ground as volcanic popping because it's a seam. That's why the Atlantic Ocean exists. It ripped at one point at the top, and then as this big giant solid ball of continent started getting torn apart, one in the Pacific, one in the Atlantic, starts to spread out. Of course, all the sedimentary rock's going to fall down into the crack, and then it starts to fill up with water, and that's how you get an ocean, and that's how you don't have Pangea drift. But while they're down there, they're mapping mountains. They're doing as many experiments as possible. Now, the one thing that they don't have any evidence of is the same sort of weather meteorology that they did in that northern base in the Arctic. And, but you also have to understand that the temperatures of which they're dealing with are way colder in the south region. However, they did find the couple clearings where, due to the terrain, there are some really warm spots relative to the rest of the island, and they weren't covered in ice, which is very interesting, or snow. So that's the official story of why that base was made, why it never attained any sizable, magnitude. But, you see movies like Indiana Jones, which I believe they had, an Arctic base, a submarine, big, heavy concrete structures, the amount of materials that they would have had to have brought down there to build the stuff that you've seen in fiction is, massive, a huge fleet. And you have to understand that you have a lot of whaling ships in the area from other countries. Plus, when you move things in the ocean, well, there's constantly shipping, freight lanes over the ocean. And so you have trade going all the way down to Africa, crossing the ocean into various regions in the area. I mean, the slaves got here 400 years before that by sailing from Africa to North America. So, I mean, we had very, very established routes. So if you just had a bunch of Nazis just, hey, what's going on? Why is that armada going south? Keep an eye on them. Okay. It would have changed history for the official history of all of our countries, right? And that would have led to a much bigger mystery if someone took a picture of an armada of ships, big heavy ships, right? With all these catapulted planes off of them and little, cranes to lift over stuff and just the whole construction gear to make this happen. Now, if anyone could have built the base, the Germans would have been probably the most sophisticated group of people on planet Earth to pull it off with the least amount of expenditure. But even with that accolade, they can't possibly do it without bringing big equipment, right? Now, at the same time, other countries are also putting bases down there. But when we say bases, let's get a little bit of perspective here. You look up stuff today and you'll see some pretty amazing, elaborate, sort of Lego bases down there that are on sleds and all kinds of wild stuff. But 1930s. A base was essentially, I think the biggest kind of building they might have built down there would have been a 2-story manor house in England, maybe 50 feet wide, 15, 20 feet deep, 2 stories, pitch roof, 112 pitch roof, or maybe would have been really steep. But there were some interesting things that started to happen around the time of the end of the war. There's 2 U-boats, the U-530 and the U-997, which surrendered themselves in Argentina. And I think it was a couple of years after the war they did this. And, for those of you who've studied the actual eventuality of Hitler and his men, but especially Hitler, and this was joked about for years in the 60s and 70s, that he was allowed to live out his life in Argentina. Now, the most convincing documentaries, I think, are less than 10 years old, where they went down there and interviewed folks who were very, very young at the time, who were, like probably my parents' age at the time, where they worked in the diners, they worked in the area of this town where he lived. And there's photographs of him old. The general consensus from all that research, and there was a guy that actually wrote a book way back in that time frame that claimed that Hitler did end up living in Argentina. And they, of course, they snope him away and say that he was lying or whatever. They just call it fiction because they're in their mind without proof, then it's not true. But with the internet, proof is a whole different game. Finding eyewitnesses and video, taping them or whatever, recording them, and putting together, even a little documentary from a student is very doable. But I've personally seen the interviews with these individuals, and we're not talking about, your conspiratorial person who's selling a T-shirt or selling a book or has something to gain from saying that, Hitler lived there. But they generally say that Hitler died in, the number I heard was 1964. And then Eva Braun died in 1968. And so that makes sense with his age and what have you. And then Angela Merkel might have been his daughter. Now, Angela Merkel, by all stretch, looks like Adolf Hitler. She does. The story that they give you, since we're on the story of Hitler, is that she was a girl who grew up in East Germany. But we've got photographs of her as a child hanging out with the, was it Chancellor? The May girl, the May woman who was running England just before this latest guy, and some other woman who became a very successful business entrepreneur, millionaire, billionaire, whatever, in Europe. So those photographs are in the dozens. But she was supposedly growing up in East Germany. Why I say East Germany? Because it's a beautiful place to say someone grew up by which there's no paperwork to prove that this kid existed. Because East Germany was literally a forgotten realm of Russia, right? Not a lot of paperwork being done there. And her age coincides, I think, technically speaking, I think she was supposed to be born in 1954. Okay, so you wait about 10 years, you have a kid. And we have to consider there might have been more than one kid. Who knows? But these 2 submarines are rumored to have, gone down and dropped off Hitler in the Antarctica. There are stories of him being cremated and having his ashes stored in some crazy base down there. The only problem with the story is with those 2 U-boats is that they had to have made all this journey based on when they surrendered and when they said they were where they were. According to the conspiracy of it all, they would have been there in the heat of winter when the ice shelf in the Antarctica grows up to 1,600 kilometers away from the edge of the island, or the continent, I should say. And so it also grows several meters thick, and there's no U-boats that can just, raise up and crash through the ice. And because U-boats have to come up for air every 2 days on average, it couldn't have done it. I mean, it would have been, there could be a soft spot somewhere, but the technology way back in the day to, send a beam up and find out how thick ice is, I'm unaware of any, technology that was rumored to do that. I'm not sure if it exists today, but, our Trident submarines are much more intense. But ice is an equalizer, right? It doesn't give a shit what technology you have. It's, sometimes, I don't know if it's as dense as steel. It's not as dense as steel, but boy, it'll tear you apart, right? Remember the Titanic, right? Now, one thing I found out that was extremely surprising with one of the conspiracies that has definitely some facts to it was that there was this battle down there between us and the Germans, because there were, I guess, 3 people who died in an accident on the ice and a sailor that died in a ship. And so they tallied up those 4 deaths and said that those were the result of a big giant battle. And I would say that sounds like victory to me if there's a naval battle and only 4 people pass away. But it's confirmed that 3 of them passed away on the ice, which I guess could have been some, again, gun battle or something. But again, if you really study World War II and the attrition of that war on the German government and how much they were conserving all resources in order to continue the war so that they could have a chance at winning, the idea that someone would, let's just rewind history and pretend like we're a fly on the wall and there's this, meeting with Hitler and all of his commanders. And it's like, can you imagine him saying, well, how are we doing with our base in Antarctica? What would be the point? We going to go down there and live? Yeah, that's some nice living, isn't it? Negative 60 below, is it 60 below zero is a winter temperature down there, depending on what elevation you're at. And that's why it's so much colder down there, is because it is land that lifts you up into the atmosphere, thus cooling off the temperatures. The Arctic, melts completely away every few years and then freezes all the way back because it's a cycle up there, because it's just sea level, right? There's no continent up there. Now, the other thing is that regardless of what they've done, and again, we can engage a cover-up story to this, but there have been, from all different countries that have sophisticated, technology to do this, but there's still researchers from countries that don't have the technology that get on these expeditions and they go down there. The region that they supposedly commandeered, which was again a very accessible region, which is why Norway had already settled it, has been utterly overrun by tens of thousands of scientists in the last 80 years. So if there's some secret base, then that exact region, which is very populated today in terms of this is where you get off, this is where you go to this place, this is where you go to, base 1 sort of thing. How could they hide it? And let me give you a better analogy so that your brain can digest this. It would be tantamount to someone saying, there's something called, Cape Cod? It's the handle of Massachusetts, the state in America that's on the coast, on the East Coast, in the New England area. Let's say someone said that the Nazis created this secret base there, like we weren't here or something, and now America's here. And now it's like, okay, well, I got a cousin lives there and uncle lives there, and someone always goes there to vacation. It's like, if there was a big military base there, big concrete structure, and there's a cover-up going on, right? The U.S. government hides it or whatever, then you wouldn't have all that population allowed there. You go to some other location. But if you really look up the area where they were on a map, and you look at the way it's populated today, it's one of the most accessible places on the whole continent. So if it existed, then they destroyed it or we destroyed it. But I honestly believe, because we haven't, as the, first world countries after World War II, we haven't created a giant base down there that mirrors the Indiana Jones kind of stuff. I think there was that hidden base was in the Antarctica, I think, in one of those movies. I could be wrong, but somebody did something like that. laying foundation and pouring tons of cement, and, how's cement going to dry in this really cold weather? Maybe it dries great. Maybe it doesn't. Hell, I don't know. But it would be a huge effort. And everywhere there's a pillbox in Europe or a big bunker on Omaha Beach and stuff, all that stuff's still there. Because it's really hard to get rid of, and it's very expensive to get rid of it. And so you're kind of like, well, fuck it. Just leave it there and we'll call it a historical site. It's important that we tell the history anyway. So there it is, right? But I'm going to hop around now because the conspiracies start to fly around. And again, there's some sort of interesting truths that apply to this. And then, we can easily take it somewhere else. So, again, it's not a crime to hear a conspiracy and be entertained and dive into it. And just really, you're researching a LARP in a lot of cases. And so, one of the things that is really rumored about Hitler is that he was into the supernatural. He was into this alternate, paranormal world. And so, the real truth of the matter is that his father's mother was a maid at a Rothschild mansion, unwed, gets pregnant. She's released from duty. She's flown to Austria to have this, driven to Austria to have this kid, which is his father. And then, when Hitler turns 18 years old, he goes away for 2 years and comes up with Mein Kampf and comes up with all kinds of, I'm going to be at certain places at certain times and things are going to happen for me. So there's evidence that he's sort of a bastard child of the Rothschild family, but so remote on the family list that he's not going to get that kind of, you're a full-blooded Rothschild sort of treatment. And because, Rothschild, even they're was Ashkenazi Jews, which means they're converted Jews, not genetic Jews. I don't mean to offend anyone because they've now crossed their bloodstream so much that I'm sure they do have Jewish blood in them at some point. But he had to hide the fact that he had this grandmother that had a child with a Jew. And so his father was potentially half Jewish. And he had to burn down the hospital, get rid of all of his records. And the only other guy to do that's Barack Obama. This is being recorded at the time that the DHS whistleblower on Obama just was murdered. It's just funny how that shit just gets reported. Everyone's like, oh, that's just too bad. It's like, really? It's just too bad? They just killed a guy that could absolutely expose Obama for what he was. Crazy, man. But one of the interesting things I found out that they talked about this battle was that the story goes is that the base was never destroyed. And the Nazis not only created the base, but were able to be in this really Grand Central Station area of the Antarctica with all these other researchers passing by for decades, and they're completely hidden away. And, there's mountain ranges that, people are like, oh, there's pyramids down there. And it's like, really? Haven't you ever taken soil and dropped it and dropped it and dropped it until it made a pyramid shape? Well, that's kind of the way organic mountains do their thing, man. It's nuts how, some folks feel like they need to go there. But the absurd story, in my opinion, was that within 15 or 17 years from 1945 to 1958, there's this big battle royale and atomic bombs were dropped down there, 3 atomic bombs. And what I didn't know was that the Americans did detonate 3 atomic bombs down there. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of crazy. If you try to travel down there today, you can't get any of your permits to travel down there, which is a big catalyst for flat earth believers because they won't let you defecate. They won't let you walk. You can't touch a plant. You can't touch an animal. Like they make it impossible for you to get your permit to travel there. But America detonates 3 atomic bombs. And supposedly, some of them fairly deep, like 200 kilometers inland. The second bomb was blown up. I couldn't figure out what the megaton rating was, but it's just crazy. I watched a video that basically showed a huge explosion. It seemed very icy and white, And I don't know if they're trying to say that that was the filming of the 1958 explosion. But so 1958, all these bombs are dropped down there. And again, this is where they claim that there was a huge battle with the Nazis. And the idea would be, that means the Nazis went, hundreds of miles inland to build their base, which again, just ask anyone who's been there, go study just general researchers in the area all the way up until like the 70s and 80s. People were dying there like Mount Everest. It was crazy. But the other one is that the Nazis met aliens who were living in the South Pole. Okay, well, there is a treaty that was signed by every country that was anybody in the 50s that said no one's allowed down there unless you get permission. So, once an area is coveted and held in secret, well, that's going to fuel rumors. Rumors and theories. Now, the big question, and there's that incredible, I forget the freaking name of the series, but there's this incredible movie series, which I believe Netflix has, where these Russian kids had created this funny ass story where the Nazis actually escaped Earth and went to the moon and set up the base there. And they were missing like a power supply to get back to Earth because their ship crashed or whatever. Eventually they steal a power source and they come back to invade Earth. I think it's up to 3 movies now. And if you know the budget that these kids are working with and their backstory, it is great entertainment. It has dinosaurs in it, and it's just hilarious, man. Now, the story of an alien working with the Nazis, it's easy fodder for the unknown. If for whatever reason I took my house and I painted all the windows black or white or put tinfoil on them or whatever so no one could ever see it, and I refuse to let anyone come in the house, and it becomes a big national story, people could start all kinds of rumors. Oh, he's got aliens in there. He's got reptiles in there, whatever. And what defense do you have besides to let someone in your area to prove that it's not occurring, right? For people that want you to fear them more than love them, which in a time of war is definitely a mental piece of propaganda technique that is very valuable, right? I used to think the Roswell thing did not occur and that it was used as a psyop against other countries to suggest that we had UFO materials. Now, I still don't know what we would have discovered out of those ships besides the theory of, the spaceship itself. And again, if you just go and listen to my 2 Roswell episodes, I went in not believing anything about that stuff. And when I just quarantine my research to the witnesses of the materials being brought to various locations and looked at by experts, remember Roswell base was a weather balloon covert secret base. And so the people that saw the materials that came off of this crash site are looking at these materials going, well, we build everything at Roswell. So this cover story that it's a weather balloon, and all the materials were made from toy tape and balsa wood and plastics and all this other crap. One of the guys that was interviewed who saw all the material held them with his hands 2 days in a row because he got to see it the night before and the morning the day after. He talked all about it, and he goes, "This is nothing that we made." He goes, he's the dude that actually crushed the foil and said it came back to the same shape. He's the guy that shot a bullet through it and couldn't put a hole in this paper thin steel. This guy's not selling t-shirts. He's not selling a book. And he was probably within 5 years of his death when he did the interview because he was so freaking old. But you just do all the interviews from the husbands and wives and the friends of people that were murdered. And where these old ladies are just, terrified of the camera. Like, am I going to get killed if I tell you this sort of thing? It's not Hollywood, man. These people are telling you what they believe to be the truth, at least, right? But now with Flat Earth, you've got this theory that the aliens are just on the other side of the wall. So you can get real romantic with that story too. But now the question is if they made a friendship with aliens, I don't think Hitler would have ended up in Argentina. I don't think that the Germans may have lost the war. It just depends on your theory of what aliens would do with a hostile nation that is at war with the rest of the world, minus Japan and the US, battling it out in the Pacific. And, and could you imagine, trying to assess a situation? You're an alien race that either is already here and you're being, your door's being knocked on. You're like, oh, who is it? Oh, it's these humans out here. Or you land and you're watching this world war occur. Now, unless these are sadistic bastards that participate in war or love to create bullshit, storms for us to fight and that kind of stuff, which it seems contradictory, doesn't it? That an alien would be a war-bound race, there's this whole thing of they're always invading a planet, turning us into slaves. We mine precious minerals, negating the fact that fusion can make anything in the universe that can be created on the elements table, plus a few of the things that we haven't figured out how to make, maybe element 115. You don't need to, you can just take stardust and make gold if that's what you need. There's just no need for us to mine it out of the ground at this huge expenditure and crossbreed our genes together to make us slaves. It's just all that's just fiction. It's just fun stuff. Have fun with it. I would yell at your neighbor or your wife if they don't believe you. Don't lose a friendship over it. Now, there's all these fake Photoshop pictures too of, Hitler with an alien, and then you'll see the original photograph and there's no alien in the photograph. And then someone will come around and say, well, see, they took the alien out first. And it's like, oh, okay. You can't win the argument in trying to prove that the stuff didn't exist because none of us were there. But I think that logically speaking, it would be, I don't know. I would just, in my estimation of something that is just completely fictitious, which is us having made this huge relationship with an alien race, I don't think that they would participate in a war nor enable someone to win a war. If the atomic bomb is any sign of our capabilities, in Star Trek, the whole idea that we have to hit warp in order to be visited by one of the folks, which for us was the Vulcans, that it makes sense. I mean, Gene Roddenberry was brilliant with that, which is to say warp is the reason why. I don't know if that was actually something he came up with or not, but it could have been one of his writers. But the idea that now you're traveling the universe, you're going to get in our backyard, and because you're going to get in our backyard, you need to be introduced to the rest of the population of the galaxy. That makes sense. But, we look for aliens in space because we are looking for, radio transmissions. And right now, as of, late February 2020, we have a broadcast that's happening every 16 days, and they're trying to figure out what it is. Interesting. Tesla, when he was in Springfield, Colorado, immediately when he was building an antenna, was finding, this is like in 1916, okay? He was getting a transmission from space that seemed very intelligent. And of course, they made fun of him and tried to get rid of it. So, hey, it's a pretty good basis for a nice story, isn't it? But one of the stories, okay, and I'm not even making this up, is that Cthulhu, something that H.P. Lovecraft created out of thin air, which is, Cthulhu is, I've explained this a couple times, but the best analogy I could give you would be that black ball in the movie Fifth Element that's coming to just erase everything, or it is the nothing in the never-ending story. It is interested in destroying all things, meaning nothing is there after it does what it does, which negates its own existence. So the whole being is this almost like mental paradox. But that this being lives underneath the ice, right? Now, the funny thing about that story is that people who are idiots don't understand that the Antarctica is a land-based structure. I don't give a shit what you believe about an ice barrier and all that kind of stuff. Go in a few miles and dig down and you're going to hit rock. If you go in a few more miles, you're going to start seeing mountains. So the idea that it's underneath the ice, which would mean underneath the continent, is hilarious. Okay, I guess it's on the edge somewhere, right? But that Cthulhu lives there, he lives under the ice, and that Hitler, being this big supernatural freak, I guess he found a treasure map or had heard a rumor and through Interpol and went down there and found him and did a deal with him. It's like, please, he would have won the war and Earth would have disappeared, right? You know, according to Lovecraft, it's I believe that's the dude who came up with the story. You know, our souls wouldn't exist. I mean, it would just be the story of Faust times 100, you know, times 1,000,000, times infinity. Okay, but let's go to what the Nazis were actually developing around the time of 1944-45 and what we found in their schematics right before Operation Paperclip smuggled them all over to the United States, at least as I've always heard it described to us. And I think history has actually revealed that they always said that the Russians and the Americans in Berlin split these folks up and said, okay, if you're really, really brilliant, you're going to get a clean, expunged past, meaning all your Nazi war crimes are going to be removed from history. You're going to get, in some cases, a brand new identity. And then the Dulles brothers, you know, smuggle them over to the United States and they get split up. And a bunch of them went to the mind control program, MK Ultra, and the other ones went off and created NASA, which is where you get Werner von Braun, engineer and designer of the V1 and V2 rocket systems, right? I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this, but this UFO aircraft, this flying saucer aircraft that the Nazis were working on, I think it was called the Deglacker or the Bell. And it's very much like the old Hindu drawings of a anti-gravity ship, which then feeds into a lot of Bob Lazar's designs for his sports model, like the one that lands in the backyard. Now, Bob Lazar definitely updated to look a little bit more sort of like vector car design or Lamborghini car design of the 70s and 80s. You know, it was very smooth and refined, whereas the Bell that the Germans had drawn on paper was almost identical with a little bit of refinement from the Hindu illustrations that were like, you know, around this time of the story of Christ, right? We also know that the Germans were working on a flying wing that had the intent to be a stealth bomber, a stealth aircraft, which now, of course, the U.S. military have perfected that whole concept, right? But the flying wing was something that the Pontiac logo was based on, because it was an aircraft that we conceived of, you know, back in the turn of the century. My hometown is named after a pilot named Octave Chanute. Octave Chanute was a guy that was like an OG aviator who came up with all kinds of wild patents. And one of his big patents was to shape the fuselage like a wing, which, albeit wasn't the flying wing concept, but imagine, you know, we get in these tubes, right? And tubes are very structurally amazing, right? The arch is something that's phenomenal in terms of its strength, which is why we have tube-based planes. But imagine the brilliance of taking the entire fuselage of a jet and shaping it like a wing. And so the whole body of the plane, including the wings, are creating lift. The other thing Octave Chanute figured out was the vertical or the horizontal stabilizers in the nose cone. And so you'll see various fighter jets have used that. I think the Russian version of the Concorde looking plane had that. And it's very versatile. I mean, if you take the pilot out of an aircraft, you can put that wing on the front and you can do, you know, 180 turns at, G-forces that a pilot would be killed. So there's just been brilliant stuff all over the world. And when we found it in the Nazi realm, you know, I think the thing that really blows the mind of most people, and this is the way I would have written the conspiracy as a complete fictional thing to drop on society as this truthful thing, right? If I was going to be that devious, I would have found a more opportune time, maybe a decade or two before the war, and weave a conspiracy, but it still doesn't pan out in the end, but weave a conspiracy where the Germans would have found all this alien technology way before they wanted to conduct a war. And I mean, gee, if you want to make a movie out of it, you have Hitler going down and talking to these folks wherever he finds them. He makes his case that the world has been against Germany, that they're really good people. He illustrates his case of who are the bad guys and who are the good guys. Of course, he's going to blame bankers, Jewish bankers. And he's like, look, I just need to get rid of all these people and the world will be a euphoric place. And we're going to reduce the race down to some Aryan blend. And I just need your help. And so they're like, okay, well, here's how you make the best planes, the best tanks. Here's how you make a submarine. Here's how you make all this other stuff. But then if you were to invest as an alien into Hitler, then he starts losing. You're going to let the boy hang? I mean, you're going to let him lose? Probably not. You're going to keep... Okay, well then here's how you make laser beams. Here's how you make stealth technology. Not that crappy shit, but like Klingon stealth, where your shit just disappears, right? Now, let me just put some other deltas in your brain for how brilliant everyone was in that era, okay? For instance, obviously, we start the war, and I'm going to give you a little interesting story here that I just recently saw, which will sort of, it's just an interesting story that sort of reflects what was going on in the time and how much we evolved as a result of World War II. Now, obviously, for those of you who are buffs, I got a buddy, Dave, who is just an absolute war historian of all wars, but definitely knows 1 and 2 as at a level that I've never met anyone. And I was in EA where we had the Jane series, which was all war-based games based on what was actually available at the time. But, you know, all of these countries, we started off with very few. In 1941, we started off with very few airports in the whole world. And so one of the big commodities coming out of Britain, and the name of the company escapes me, but they had mastered, you know, boat planes that land on the water, big giant things, like almost like small cruise ships with wings. And this company that was really famous for creating these big giant flying boats, they hibernated during the war and continued designing this Titanic shaped boat, man. I mean, it was a massive, massive boat with the intent that as soon as the war is over, it's all going to be, you know, the boomer age, and it's going to be great, and everyone's going to want to travel. And so in their minds, the flying boat was way more versatile because there's always a body of water somewhere. There's a lake, there's an ocean, so not a big problem, right? And so, but unbeknownst to them, because of the war, plane technology went through the roof. And because of war, every country realized we need air bases everywhere, because we need to be able to pick up and move to another place and ship stuff around. And you remember well, you may not know this, but the old email of that era was people would write telegrams on paper. It'd all get, on a periodic basis, all get bundled up, put on a plane, a very quick one, and flown to the other base. And then it would be dropped off in secret, taken to a warehouse. People on roller skates would roller skate around with these cards and go to the cubicles where people would actually sort them all. And sometimes they'd make a phone call, give some piece of information. Sometimes it'd be handed off to someone else that goes to a secretary. And actually, it may have been in reverse, excuse me. It may have been in the cubicles, and then it's taped up on the wall, and someone would skate by and grab it and then deliver it. But anyway, that was the old email back in the day. So by the time the end of the war came around, this flying boat company couldn't sell their products because the pitch that's like, hey, there's barely any airports in the world. We're going to land everywhere. You got a lake or whatever. You just build your kind of port base there, your port. Instead of airport, it would be like a water port, and people just travel over the world. Well, they ended up going out of business by the early 50s. But before they went out of business, they designed this gigantic thing, because they were also using prop engines, and they'd have like 8 prop engines on these things with like the double propellers. And they were obviously scolded by, the aeronautic industry going, why would we use that? We have jet engines now. So by the early 50s, they didn't build this, but they designed one with, I think, 28 jet engines in it and this gigantic wing. If you ever see the design of this thing, it is breathtaking, man. Just look up documentaries about flying boats on YouTube and you'll probably bump into this. It's probably about 30 minutes long. And it turns out the Russians in the 60s had created the same thing. And they were going to make these bomber planes that were going to fly over water, but they ran into all the problems that this other company ran into, which is that, especially if you land on the ocean, salt water eats up all of the mechanics. And so that became a big issue. Plus, they couldn't get this thing off the ground far enough to safely fly over the ocean waves. And could you imagine some of those ocean waves where they're 100 stories high sometimes in a really bad storm? It would be a most horrific death, wouldn't it? But, let's take, I think it was called was MP40 was their machine gun, the really long, thin tube one with the big giant mag on it. It's just this amazing machine gun. It never jammed. And, it was like the thing that if a U.S. soldier were to kill a German, a lot of them would pick that gun up and sling it over their shoulder. So when their Tommy gun ran out, they would, or their M4 or whatever, they would just start using the German gun. But around the same time, you have the Tommy gun, right? So the Tommy gun goes through two iterations. One was sort of the drum-loaded Tommy gun, which was very easy to load if you were in a nice, quiet place, right? But the problem is that if you open the Tommy gun barrel and open it up, the little canister thing, and you just have to drop the bullets in. It was the most amazing loading mechanism ever. Very simple. But if you're in a foxhole with a bunch of, artillery coming in and dirt flying everywhere, as long as a dirt clod got in your barrel, your little, what do they call it, drum, it wouldn't work anymore. And so they gave it to a Marine who evaluated the gun and was like, okay, this is great, but one, it's a little too powerful because it's kicking up a little bit too much, and I got to get rid of this drum thing because this just won't work in combat. And so they ended up creating, I believe, what was the 1928 version of it, which had the straight mag on it, shooting 45s. 45s were not intentionally chosen, but because this the pin technology inside the Tommy gun actually came off of a naval gun. The real pin mechanism was this gigantic piece of steel that used the impact and the heat of the cartridge to it actually would fire the bullet, and it would heat up the pin so much that it chemically would weld for a few split seconds to the piece of steel behind it, holding it back so that the other round would fall in, and then it loses the chemical bond and then pops the bullet in place and you get the next bullet. So these 45s specifically, because they were small rounds that work with this pin technology, was utterly brilliant. Now, we all are also familiar with the 1947, the Vershnikov, aka AK-47, which is also this massive weapon it's still a big problem today because it's so amazing. You talk about those, they're found in Vietnam, buried in the dirt, and you can just pick them up, brush them off, and fire them. I mean, they're just utterly phenomenal machines. People don't know that the 45 automatic was made in 1905. Amazing big-ass gun. Because the soldiers that they were fighting, I can't remember the war that they were talking about, but one of our enemies was taking they would take a lot of drugs, a lot of stimulants before they went into battle, because there was a high chance they would die. And so you would shoot them with other calibers and they just keep coming at you. And so the 45 was commissioned to basically disable the body, to kill it so badly with the one or two shots that this soldier ain't coming any further. And it's 145 to the chest is like someone dropping a sledgehammer from 6 feet right onto your chest if you're lying on the ground. And that's a hell of a pop, But what's interesting is this archetype with the Nazis, okay? I've said this several times in different areas, and the most classic one is in Egypt. Anytime man gets their shit together and gets really, really smart and masters technology that is then lost, It depends on who's telling the story and who blew away everyone as to how the story goes. But, you know, the pyramids in Giza, just outside of Cairo there, they are, you know, always been associated with alien technology. Aliens built them. They're alien runways, alien. I'll tell you that I think it's because white people told the story and they want to sort of cut the balls off anyone else's capabilities. The Greeks want to say they invented all the mathematics of the world because their guys named everything. But by the time you go to Egypt, you realize it's, again, if you're a Graham Hancock disciple, you'll know that they go back potentially 35,000 years before those pyramids were built. But they can't let man have that alkali. You can't believe that there was a utopian society in Egypt that just didn't have war. You know, it doesn't mean everyone got along. Doesn't mean there weren't, you know, slaves here and there, but it depends. You know, if it's really interesting, I'm just going to give a small footnote on slavery in those times. If you liked working for someone, you liked someone else making the decisions because you found it more peaceful in your mind to just execute a job. I mean, what are we when we go work for the man, right? Well, you're technically slaves, except you get a little bit of payment for your troubles. And that's basically what is calorie energy converted to monetary units that they could be spent at your leisure and your choosing. So, you know, the theories that the pyramids were built by slaves is, I think, grossly exaggerated, but then it makes that society barbaric. You know, the evidence that the Aztecs and the Mayans and what have you, and Incas, excuse me, but all those pyramids, those amazing step pyramids in South America. What is the story on them? Well, they sacrificed children. They found pits of children's skulls. There is obviously European paint on a stone down there showing, you know, a guy holding a baby and blood droplets coming off of them. And, you know, what's entirely insulting about that is, one, that painting is going to last externally because it's an external painting. There's several of them that I've seen. But you have a culture that is capable of rendering anything. You know, it's just like the Egyptians, right? The Egyptians are capable of rendering anything in terms of making a statue, painting a painting of what it looks like. And so to have like a finger paint, you know, symbol and this some asshole coming around going, no, we got proof. It's essentially, it's like a really subverted racism. It's really strange, right? So Germans are great engineers. It's in your blood. I mean, I'm 3/4 German, and the fourth that I don't know about, we're not quite sure. But it doesn't look like where the family actually migrated from. So, man, it was a bunch of my friends from Norway think we're Norwegian from that side of the family. But anyway, so it's in your blood. You have to know how everything works, and you can figure out everything if you put your mind to it. And so if I create something great and you don't understand it, then okay, there's a conspiracy theory. I'm an alien in my backyard and I was given all the technology, because it couldn't happen from me, right? This is typically how it goes. All of the stuff I've talked about where they say the Roswell crash gave us integrated circuits, gave us fiber optics and Velcro. Okay. You know, Velcro is a natural occurrence in feathers. It's a natural occurrence in flowers, pollination technology, where animals are bumping flowers and carrying these things to other flowers and on their you know, their fur or whatever. In terms of, you know, fiber optics, we've been extruding every material in the world through holes. And so we knew in the Egyptian era that if you put a flame next to glass, that light beam goes completely across the glass. Okay, so you extrude it through a hole, and there you have a piece of glass that's going to carry the light. And then you start using other materials that are more flexible, that have glass-like properties. It's just a natural progression of technology. Integrated circuits, well, once we really started getting into chemistry, which is, my God, how far back does alchemy go? Things exposed to light naturally burned away, and someone went, oh shit, where did it all go? Well, the sunlight hit it. Oh shit, that was sunlight burns that stuff? Yeah. Okay, well, let's try to see what we can do with this. And so silicon is a conductive material. You can layer it and insulate it and layer it, insulate it, burning it with light the whole way, and you make some transistors and what have you. all these conspiracies, it really makes you negate your own capability. Because if you constantly say aliens made everything, the second that man actually figures out anything, then you're negating your own genetics potentially from being an engineer, from being the next person. So you want to just go up on a hill somewhere and, salute aliens until they drop by and give you some knowledge, Now, the sad fact is that because a bunch of psychopaths run the world, almost every innovation is either used to enslave us, like Tesla's technology being, canceled, to everything going into a war machine algorithm. Oh, you can do that? Okay, can I kill you with it? Okay, great. I'm going to defund your thing, and then we're just going to go full military on this, right? Probably, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit here with a little bit more on the stick, but one of the greatest science fiction movies that really illustrates this whole acidic loop that we're in is the Christopher Walken, Natalie Wood movie, her last movie, by the way, Brainstorm, where they invented the technology where they could put a helmet on your head and record all of your senses, all 5 senses. And then they could record it on this wild tape and then play it back, and you had the same experience that the other person had, including death. And so the woman who played Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is Christopher Walken's scientific partner in the laboratory, and they just mastered this. And what they didn't realize was that the institute that they were working for, which I think was a private institute, they didn't realize it, but they were being subsidized by the government. And there's this creepy albino guy that he's not really albino, but he's got sort of the Edgar Winter hair. He just plays the greatest creepy dude for the government. But Nurse Ratched's yelling at Walken saying, don't let them sell us to the government, because the second they get a hold of our technology, they will find a way to weaponize it. And so you're looking at this technology going, well, recording the senses, like how the hell is that going to turn into a weapon? You're going to get your enemies to wear a helmet. And they created, in the movie, they created a bunch of MK Ultra kind of recordings that were eventually watched by Walken's son, who ends up in the hospital after playing it for just a few minutes. But it happened in the movie, It did get commandeered. And just to set the premise up for you, in case you haven't seen that movie, the reason why you need to see that movie, one, it's early Christopher Walken, which is just always a diamond mine of amazing acting. And Natalie Wood is one of the finest actresses to ever live. And she passed away, I think, during the filming of this, right off the coast of where I'm sitting in Catalina Island, where we think her husband pushed her off the boat. Probably not meaning to kill her, but she was drunk and drowned. And then, of course, he looks to Christopher Walken and says, I didn't mean to kill my wife. Oh, I know, man. She was drunk. She was belligerent. She hates your guts. And then this happens. And so poor Walken, man, he's had to hide the secret of that death his whole life. Her family is still not letting up on that investigation, by the way. But the premise of the movie is that it kind of gets hot. The government's moving in to take the technology, but they haven't quite done it yet. They don't really have the catalyzing reason to say, this is why we're taking it away from you. But Nurse Ratched, I forget what her name is in the movie, but she is working on a circuit board or something at night by herself. And we've seen her take a little heart pill earlier in the movies to establish she has that issue. And she needs to solder something. She smokes. She's a chain smoker in the movie. And so she's reaching for, I think, her cigarette or something like that. And she happens to burn her wrist on a hot soldering iron. And that kicks off a cardiac arrest because of her weak heart. And so she's going for the box of her little tiny pills. And she spills them on the ground. And she's trying to get to them, but the heart attack is massive. And in a brilliant move, this is just the premise of this movie, let alone the story they created around it, which was better than the premise. And the premise is an A+ premise. She puts the headset on and hits record and then dies. And then the next day, Christopher Walken shows up with one of his kind of assistants, and they're they're trying to figure out what happened. Her body's gone. And he's like, okay, this was the tape that she recorded just before she passed. And they're like, yeah. So he goes, okay, well, I'm going to play it and you stand right here. And so he puts this thing on and turns it on, and he immediately starts having a heart attack. And he's starting to freak out, and his buddy knocks the thing off his head and grabs him. And then, of course, he rehabilitates because he doesn't have a weak heart. And he's like, okay. We need to disconnect all the respiratory stuff off the tape. Just flatten that track. Let me just have sight and sound and maybe touch or something, whatever's left. And they start messing with the machine, and they end up playing this tape. He only gets partially through the tape before I think they're rated. And it's basically this amazing thing that's on the tape because she recorded the fact that she died. So I'll let you watch the movie, but it's fantastic. I know it's a huge digression, but it's just like a little side dish in your 5-course meal here. I guess for me, part of this whole thing is a phenomenon. I don't know. I guess it's like if, some people have skills to do really weird things. And I think that we have enabled, I guess, fortunately, unfortunately, who knows, right? It's maybe there's no need to have a bias on it or a judgment call on it, but we have people that are really, really good at stitching this stuff together, stitching together narratives. I'm sure in the Army Corps of PsyOps, they have classes on how to do this and how to put stuff together, which is why, my friend Vivian, she tries to warn me about some of these things. She's like, just be careful how much you jump off on that kind of stuff, because unless you've really got the concrete proof, you got to be careful because you might be getting had. And then, of course, with any channel like this, credibility is a huge thing. And me as a human being, credibility is just everything. It is like your word is bond, and you don't lie and you don't make up shit. And that tends to make life really nice. I could tell you that any celebrity friend you might have in life, they are approached by thousands of kooky, weird motherfuckers. I'm just telling you, man, I've had to run interference for some of my rocker buddies, and I've seen it firsthand. I've seen some just nutty shit. And so if you are trying to get close to them because you feel like you got something in common, there's a couple things you have to do. And the number one thing is to never tell lies and embellish shit, because they get that all the time. And if they trust you, they're liable to repeat it. Now, you can lie all the time in your private world, and who's interviewing you? Nobody. You're never on a radio show. You're not on some live interview. But if you pass some of that information to someone who's constantly in the limelight and repeating stuff that's interesting to them, and they think you're telling them the truth, and then they come out and look like a total douche who's it could destroy their career. So they got to be very careful. So the first element of getting next to people that are very creative and very powerful with their talent pool is to have integrity. The second part of it is you don't lie about, not lie, because I just covered that. The big one is when you're asked about your opinion, you have to be honest. And you have to, if you're going to criticize something, you're going to have I'm only going to criticize something if I can see potentially a method to make it better, right? Like, I've told the story once before, and this relates to the phenomenon of this Nazi story and us believing in things. This is why I'm telling you this, because we need to kind of improve the algorithm of our brains as human beings, in my opinion. One of the places I really learned this, as a very specific example, was that my writing mentor is a person that changed my life. Absolutely changed my life. With the stuff that he's made, I saw it. It changed who I was as a human being. Other people participated, and they also catalyzed the effect of what this person did. But I revere this man. He's if I were to say who affected my life the most, he's in the top 2 or 3. Okay. He might be tied for first with a couple other individuals, but he was mentoring me on how to write. And he was working on a script that he had written before he met me. And he gave it to me. And he's like, well, just tell me what you think. And I read it. And it's great, 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 great. Up to this point of the ending. And I can't even remember what the old ending was. But I remember sitting in my house. And I don't know how many months I was with this guy at the time. Maybe 3 or 4 months. I've now known him for 13 years. Or I guess 12 and a half. But I sat there in my house and I'm thinking to myself, shit, I don't like this at all. I think this is a lame ending. And people were dying too soon. People didn't have any profound, meaning to the script, meaning they died without ever really contributing any massive turn, but they were huge characters in the film. It was very close, but it wasn't quite there. And I remember just, he and I used to write like books to each other every night at the beginning. And so I wrote this huge, probably page-long thing about like, because of this, because of that, I think this guy would have done this, or he would have had some effect on this person because he's that way. I pitched it to him basically to change it. Didn't really offer, I didn't rewrite the ending myself and give it to him, but he got it. And he's like, we had lunch very soon after that. And he was like, so you don't like that, huh? And he goes, yeah, I can kind of see your point. So he went off over the next week and rewrote a new ending. Utterly nailed it. And so within a month, I was going over there 3 times a week. It was like an hour about an hour one way. And we're sitting there in his living room. And he said, I really want to thank you for pushing me on this ending because I really love the new ending and it really tied up a lot of stuff that I felt, but I just hadn't really, had anyone push me on this. And he just said, I want to really thank you for doing that. And here I am listening to someone who I revere greatly. And I was able to contribute something to his game that I enjoyed the rewrite and he enjoyed the rewrite. And we went and pitched it all over Hollywood. So it was cool. So, as we ingest all these conspiracies, what I think is really fun, because I used to think it was fun to go into the room only if I thought I was completely right about everything. And I have to say, early in the game, probably 2005 or so, right? I was very quick to believe things. They're probably slower than other people, but for me, the way I am today, because I know a lot of you folks and listen to your comments and read them and what have you, I realize I have to really be careful. And I like that now. I like that layer of like, well, I've heard the stories. So today what I do is I say, okay, if it's like this particular conspiracy and you guys are going to jump in with a bunch of cool facts and I can't wait to hear your take and what made you believe this is true or not true, what have you. But it's now almost, it's more euphoric for me to get into a conversation about a conspiracy where I'm not sure, but all I've done is gather a bunch of data. And so in the conversation, I'll say, well, yeah, I've heard that, and there's this other thing too, right? And then if I'm in the conversation, typically it's because someone else brought it up. Very rarely will I just jump in on somebody and just say, hey, I don't know if you like conspiracies, but let's have a huge conversation. I only do that for the ones I really believe I've got the drop on. But anyway, you start having these really rich conversations where the other person is not defensive and they're not accusatory and they're not developing any heat in the conversation because you're not telling them they're wrong and you're not necessarily telling them that they're right. You're being very objective, as they say, right? You're just kind of presenting the facts. So maybe because the internet is now, a healthy 25 years old, definitely a good 15 years into this type of content that's, we're talking about. Maybe it is an etiquette that we experiment with or engage in fully, where now we just sort of, for Bigfoot or something like that, you're just kind of like, well, I'm still waiting for the evidence. Flat Earth, I feel like I'm the same way. I will talk to my friends about flat Earth, and I'll represent flat Earth from their perspective, and I'll say, well, there is that thing, and then there's this, and then part of it, because it becomes so jumbled up, where we have kind of evidence that it's round, evidence that it's not moving, all these different things. I'm looking for the coup de grace for a lot of these things. Someone else who's never heard of the theory before, but maybe they have some science in it. They're able to just to say something. I'll give you an example. It just happened with my geologist friend. I was mentioning to her and showing her some visual evidence that I don't think meteorites really happen, especially the surface of the moon. And if you're new to that comment, it's because every single one of these things is perfectly round, just save any erosion that might have happened over many years, right? And I just said this, but you'll like this because this little Paul Harvey to the story. Diamond Head in Hawaii looks just like the crater in Arizona off the Interstate 40, which is about, I think they're similar to the same size. Now, Diamond Head is a lot more pitched and younger, has a lot less erosion, and still has it's in a tropical environment, so there's a lot of green on it. But I've been to both. And she was telling me, well, that thing she believes it's a meteorite in Arizona, because this is the first time anyone's ever confronted her with this other theory. And I said, well, I don't buy it. I just don't buy the fact that everything is perfectly, all these meteorites that are becoming straight down, which means they had no forward momentum in the atmosphere. Or they didn't fly through space. They just came, from wherever they came directly at Earth. They came directly at the moon, right? So she told me this thing. She goes, well, you could find out whether or not the crater in Arizona was a volcanic eruption at some point in the past, because a volcano, even if dormant, even if it will never erupt ever again, maybe the plate underneath that created this geyser of magma has moved on. All the structures underneath are frozen in time, meaning the plates underneath will have the volcanic, cyclone, or I should say like silo up to it, all frozen in time, like the Devil's Tower, which is above ground, right? Because it's expanding Earth. But, no one's going to go dig underneath that thing to find it out. Why would you? One, they have a tourist site for a meteorite, which makes money. So the last thing they're going to do is spend money to prove it's not a meteorite impact. They're going to, if you go there, they have all these paintings and renderings of the impact, And of course you have the sort of crater-shaped rings that are in the north tip of South America, where they say the extinction event occurred, right? The amount of inference by theories is just unbelievable. And we just believe it. And it's, it's, again, I'll always reference the dinosaur tooth. What was it? 1857 or something, when this tooth was found. It's just a tooth, man. 6-inch tooth. That's it. Now it's a big ass tooth. If it's truly calcium based or enamel based tooth, whatever the hell had that tooth was definitely some big ass creature. If it's truly a tooth, right? It's like, okay, so have you ever walked on a beach? You ever been in a desert? You ever been on some mountainside where a bunch of rocks are constantly dripping down the side, and you can find rocks that are shape of arrowheads, but they're not arrowheads. You can find one that's shaped like Bigfoot, and it's not a statuette of Bigfoot. It just happened to tumble that way. So if you're searching and searching and searching, you never know what you can find. But anyway, they totally constructed basically a small Tyrannosaurus Rex looking creature around this tooth. No bones were ever found by this tooth, ever. And so to have in 2010 and 2020, what year am I in? Jesus. The Tyrannosaurus Rex exists. It defies all physics. It defies all biology of an animal. It doesn't, like, physics doesn't hold the thing up the way it's designed. They constantly make excuses for its bad design, but they publish it like a theory that is true, I can't make a whole episode about this, most likely. without boring the shit out of you people. So I'll give you a little 5-minute dissertation on this theory. Imagine that you were able to talk to some oracle, some angel, some alien, God himself. And I have these things I call God facts, which are the facts that we'll never know without a God to tell us the truth, which is to say, you ask a question, you get the answer, the absolute answer that's the truth. And if you were to ask God, okay, what percentage of stuff that we believe on this planet is true? Just the ratio, just 100% split in two pieces. How much do we believe that is completely fake, and how much do we believe that we actually have true? From history to science to the philosophy of the universe's creation, what you are, God, like how messed up are we? Imagine the answer. Imagine the answer. I'm going to say, without knowing, my hunch at this point is that we are well below 50% in terms of the no. We believe in fake gods. We believe fake history because the victors wrote it to make people look like shit. We have all kinds of fake science, fake pop science. NASA's and JPL is an institution that is essentially a, it's funny. I can draw an analogy here. The old 50s shows that were on the radio that were science fiction shows, 2000 plus and X-1, the two that you need to listen to, X-1 being the best one ever made. It was a publishing company that was publishing small little booklets every week of science fiction stories. And these writers lived these tumultuous lives trying to compete for publishing, right? They'd write a whole story and the editor would go, it's not good enough. And they wouldn't get any money. It was atrocious. But they pushed that fiction into fictional radio shows and made a bunch of money and entertained the shit out of us, right? For me, JPL and NASA are the replacement. It's no longer fiction anymore. They make it up, and they make it up in such a way that it's science fiction, not science fantasy, which is sci-fi, right? Star Wars is sci-fi. None of that shit needs to work. Blade Runner was science fiction. The spinner is designed to really work. All this technology and that was made to work. And so now it's a form of entertainment in a way, because if you believe man does all these amazing things, then every time you look in the mirror, you're like, well, we're really going somewhere. Mankind's going somewhere. And it's like, maybe not. Maybe if you believe that stuff, you are catalyzing your own demise. You are delaying your children from finding the truth. Now, does it really matter in the end? As I get older, I swear to God, I don't think it does. Well, at least in the spiritual sense of death. And so let's just say you're a total shithead like Hitler or somebody, whomever, pick a bad guy, and you die. And you're floating out of this place. You're looking down at your body or whatever. And then the whole truth of the whole universe comes to you, at least where you are and what you are and the ecosystem of all souls and where you've been in the past and what have you. There's the idea of like this residual sin, karma, all that kind of stuff. I just don't think it attaches to you, because there are people that beat their kids and their kids turn into serial killers, and like, you're going to really blame the kid? It's because of the asshole parent who probably had an asshole parent who had an asshole parent, just keep going up. Or it's a clean cut family. It's never had any problems, but the economy crashed so much that dad couldn't provide for his family, became a drinker because alcohol's more available now than it's ever been in the entire world history. And he had the gene to become an alcoholic. And so then he gets belligerent and strange and starts beating his kids. So there's this inception moment that it wasn't the father's fault. But he destroyed his children. He destroyed the generations underneath him. If nothing else, if they didn't become drinkers, then I got a friend of mine who was abused by his father, and he did become an alcoholic, but he immediately got into AA like really fast to stop the cycle in his early 20s. And he knew that he was abused. And so his outward personality is the most tolerant, amazing dude ever. and he's really there for you, and you could tell him stuff, but he has anxieties because certain things echo his past. He's also a very clean person, huge hygiene thing, not just personal hygiene, but the whole house and everything. And I haven't asked him, but I assume that one of the disciplinary reasons why the father could rationalize hitting him was to say, your room isn't clean, you made a mess, and it's like, so he still has that residual algorithm of, I can't let things be dirty because I might get hit again. So the mind's a weird machine. It's a million miles from the Nazi thing, but use this particular one because there's so little evidence of anything other than what I've just told you. If you think there's a bunch of evidence somewhere, evidence, not just conspiratorial videos and that kind of stuff, definitely share it in the comments section. But every once in a while, when you see things like Bigfoot, for me is just a laughable thing. I think it's my episode 300 where I think I decimated theory. Either 200 or 300, one of the two, where I just went through the whole thing in my brain live with you guys, and it just all came to me during the episode, which is like, where's the breeding cycle of a Bigfoot? A female Bigfoot's going to have to attract a mate. She's going to be pregnant for God knows how long. We carry a baby for 9 months. Wouldn't a hominid carry it for 10 months to a year? Then this kid's born and it's very weak and can't fend for itself. It's going to be literally food for coyotes. And so this mother's going to have to nurture the baby up to a point it can walk around and be safe. And then the father's going to have to be there to protect the mother. So finding and it's probably going to be a harem-based creature, just like lions and monkeys. Okay, so where's all the nests and stuff? And so for me, it just totally fell apart. Sometimes you have to go down the path to figure out where you are with a particular theory. And I want to finish out this episode with something that's a utility that I have used a lot in the past. It's going to sound a little esoteric, but I was listening to a Kanye West song called I Thought About Killing You, I think is the name of the song. It's a very interesting song. But in this lyric, he says what I've told you guys a couple times in episodes, and I've never heard another human being say it. So when he said, I was like, whoa, this is cool. A little bit of like-mindedness, right? But because you are an algorithm of truth, and what that means is the mathematics that keep you alive and keep you human instead of turning into a dog for 2 seconds and then a snail and then back to yourself, because all that's perfect. When you ingest a lie, one reason why it eats you alive inside is because it is an untruth. It is mathematically not something that occurred in time, or it's not a state of mind that you have. You're like, I love you, baby, and you don't, right? I mean, that'll eat you alive eventually. Now, what is it? Rosie O'Donnell, as much as I'm not a gigantic fan of her political views, she was quoted as telling her children, you know what happens to people who lie? They get cancer and they die. And as much as that's a brutal statement, and it's obviously representing a timeline that's very quick, I think that's true. I think people who lie constantly, you wouldn't want to be in their shoes, man. But one of the things you can do to test your beliefs is to, and this is part of the lyric he was talking about, he basically said, I'm going to say this out loud to see if I believe it. And that is a gigantic tool you can use as a human being because we're sentient. If you think you believe something, and I mean this is anything, personal, your own personal view of yourself, personal view of someone else, you think you hate somebody or hate something, you think you want to do someone harm, that's a decent one where you hear yourself say these things, and then you'll see yourself from the 60,000 foot view saying these potentially horrific things or things you simply just don't believe. You'll feel your heart and your soul and your body reject something if you don't believe it. And that gives you a full-blown three-dimensional way of really expunging it out of you. It's almost like your own exorcism. You're getting the demon out by identifying the demon's existence within you. It's like if you eat the black apple, go see my episode called The Black Apple. It is an idea from outside that you've ingested, whether it be from society or some demonic force or whatever it is. It's convincing you to be angry, to be suspicious, that sort of thing. And it eats you up and you start treating people weird, even though they're not really doing you any harm. But in your brain, you've manifested this whole story that doesn't exist. It doesn't have to be that detailed. You might try it on some of these conspiracies. One of the things I do, because I lecture from time to time, students and what have you, or if I'm going to have a really intense meeting with someone who is really brilliant and super talented, and I want to kind of just prepare, like it would almost be the same example of being a presidential candidate and going up for a debate. These people practice, and if they pay good people, Bloomberg doesn't seem to have any of them. You practice all the questions that might come at you to tear down your character or put you in a weird position where you don't seem like you know what you're talking about. And then, it will give you every branch in the tree, which is a story analogy for how we write screenplays. If you have a premise of, that Terminator coming from the past, from the future to the past to kill John Connor, well, just think about it. You have 10 writing teams, let's just say, just as a college experiment, there's 4 writers in every team. And you give them that premise and they've never seen the movie before because the Terminator was never created. And you go, write me the story of how the human beings that are normal in the present time defeat this being from the future. You don't even tell them John Connor comes back. You just let them see if they come up with that storyline. And you're going to have 10 different scripts. So that's how I practice. And that's how I make sure that I've got everything. And, 99 times out of 100, virtually everything I prepare for doesn't occur in the conversation. If I'm lecturing, I'll practice the lecture. That's different. That's me having a bunch of students looking at me, and then I'm just trying to boil all the analogies down to where I think their brains are at their age. Try to use analogies that they understand, either so generic that everyone gets it, or if there's some topical thing that they're into, I can throw that in there as well. But yeah, with these kind of fringy conspiracies, give it a try. I think that's all I got on this one. If you made it to the end, thank you so much. Hopefully this was entertaining. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. If you haven't liked and you dug it, like it. Our ratios are pretty good with that kind of thing. But I think if anyone doesn't like it, half the time they just shut it off. But again, our average view time is going up, up, up. I think at this point of this recording, we're 45.5 years. No, was it 45? 47. No, it's 47, right? 47.5 years of listen time. So it's pretty amazing. So you take all the minutes listened to on YouTube and stack them up together, and a kid would be 47 and a half years old, which is kind of cool. It'd be interesting to see what the statistics are in other channels, because, some of these other channels probably have a person who's like 1,000 years old. One of the fun ones we're looking at on YouTube, which has a lot of great stuff in it, it's called Your Daily Dose of Internet. It's this kid who makes these compilation videos of just cool stuff on the internet, and he works to make sure that he educates you. At least one thing will blow your mind in almost every one of his little episodes. There's a moon one that's pretty wild where he, I think it's called, I don't want to get it wrong, but it sounds like the word like light, it's like liberation or something like that. But it's when you take a picture of the moon, and it actually does shake in a little circle if you take a picture of the full moon every time it happens because of its wonky orbit. It's still the same face, but you do actually see a little bit of the sides that you didn't see in the previous one. It kind of wobbles. And so I had said that that should occur. I was talking about something different about its rotation. But anyway, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, that's the central brain trust of the whole operation. I am behind on some of the podcasts at this exact moment, so I'm going to get those up soon. I've been extremely busy on a brand new project. It's blowing my mind. So, plus writing. So, up there, just bookmark it, just in case the show gets moved, if YouTube gets draconian with it. But up there, it has a category list in case you like to hear only one kind of video. You want dreams, you want NASA, you want flat Earth. It's all up there and indexed. If you think you've got a video that doesn't show up in one of the playlists, which I don't think anyone's got the time or the patience to test such a thing, let me know and I'll make sure it's in the right category. But we have 2 video up there, YouTube and BitChute. BitChute, again, is 1080p, but it's also First Amendment protected. Please make an account on BitChute. If nothing else, you don't have to subscribe to me. I think we have about 145 subscribers, which isn't much. But it's just nice to know we've got a backup up there. We have all the podcast links you would ever need. So it's in the Apple Store, it's in the Google Store, and you can just subscribe directly to the website. I use a product called Podcast Addict on my Android phone. I think it's fantastic. And I believe it goes all the way back to episode 1. If you don't see episode 1 stuff in the podcast, it's because your player probably limits you to about 350 of any show. And since this goes back way before that, you won't find them there, but you can find them on the website and download the MP3s directly to your device. And you can listen to it at your leisure. We are in social media. We have a locked Facebook group with a bunch of great folks. Haven't had a lot of new members. I mean, honestly, this year, I think we've had like 3 or 4, unless our moderators are pushing them in, which they're welcome to do. We're on Twitter. I've been, experimenting with Twitter a little bit during this campaign thing. There's so much bullshit up there. It's unbelievable. But it's, in my opinion, it's the most hateful platform on planet Earth. So I try not to spend much time on it. But I do publish the feed up there as well. And there's minds.com, which is the First Amendment protected Facebook copy, which is beautiful and really cool. And I hope it takes over. If we could just have a public event where Donald Trump says, go to minds.com, and then boom, the whole platform explodes, probably crash. But I think it's a great platform. We also have a couple ways to donate to the movement, to the page, whatever. It does help pay for cigars and all kinds of stuff. Cigars about $10. So I try to get them down to about 4 by buying them in boxes, but I don't always do that. But it's PayPal. You're totally anonymous when you donate. I have not been able to find a receipt of who did what. I just get a notification that some money's been put in there. The monthly subscription is over at Patreon. If you haven't heard of that, you just put at least $1 in. If you think about it, you put $1 in, it's $12 a year. But what you get for that is you get the episodes before everyone else. You get a 20% discount on the store. Plus, you really get a closer proximity to me because there's a lot less traffic up there. And anybody who's donating cash is going to get my attention first. And it's just because they really feel the project. So it's cool. Again, all the season 1 episodes aren't on this channel. They're on a separate channel. And that channel is right at the top of the navigation. I've edited them all to be shorter, faster, and get rid of some copyrighted music I was using, unfortunately. There's also a store. So there's 2 shirts up there, which you can get in hoodies and all kinds of stuff. My shipment should be in any minute now. So I'll start wearing those. Unfortunately, it's going to be a little cold for another month or so before I'll be able to wear those just out here by themselves. But we'll get them up there. But they're going to go away as soon as the season's over, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do after that. Honestly, we need NASA to lie some more so I can make some more episodes about them. But other than that, thank you for joining. Thank you for making it to the end of the episode. I appreciate you all very much. Hope to hear from your comments on all videos. A few of you just comment like crazy, and I apologize. I can't get to all your comments with intelligent replies, but I savor every single one of them, even the ones that tell me to go F myself. And this means you care. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.